if you have a beard, certainly you're going to be confused with Hemingway. I've been down to Key West on Hemingway days. They have this holiday down at Key West every year in January. And they have a Hemingway look-alike contest, if you can believe it. So the town is full of men who look like me. If the subject is serious enough and mysterious enough, then it's to interest me and to engage me, and all my energy and all my intellect and all my honesty, whatever I can muster, then it's bound to be a subject that's too mysterious and too difficult for me to provide answers for. I mean, I think it's enough for any novelist, any artist for that matter, to provide us with the serious and important questions regarding what it is to be human, for instance, and that it's asking either too much or too little of an artist to provide the answers as well. You know, it's not that kind of an activity, that way of thinking, really. We can ask historians to provide answers, or journalists to provide answers, psychologists, philosophers, maybe. But I don't think we can ask artists to provide our answers. We want, in a funny way, we want more than answers from our artists, I think, in a paradoxical way almost. And we want them to oblige us to ask ourselves the questions we didn't know were there in the first place. You know? And I think this novel attempts to do that. It attempts to force us to ask questions about sexual criminality, ask questions about the internet, ask questions about pornography, ask questions about obesity, secrecy, betrayal, identity, the truth in the end, finally, epistemological questions, philosophical questions. Providing answers, though, is not, it's beyond me in a way, and also, I won't say beneath me, but it's outside the enterprise. The gradual utilization of children as consumers in the consumer economy, and the gradual creation of children as the single largest consumer group in our society. We sell more goods to children annually than we do to adults, and they're a bigger segment than any other age group, segment of society. Children are of the capitalist consumer economy, and increasingly so around the world, not just in the United States. And it's a process that really began in small increments, slowly, and then at an accelerated rate. But it began in the 1950s, basically when we invited the salesman into the home in the form of a television set. We, I think, began by believing with television that the advertising existed to make the programs possible. But quickly it became the opposite. The programs exist to make the advertising possible, just as in the case now with the internet. And up to this point, you know, in a very real way, we protected children from advertising, from consumerism, because they're too vulnerable. They're too easily fooled. They're too easily seduced by advertising. And so we had all those jokes about keeping the salesman outside the house, you know, slamming the door on the salesman. The salesman comes in over the top of the door. You close the window and lock it so the salesman stays out. But when you bring in a television set, and then you have an economy where both parents have to work, Then you start using the television as a babysitter. And then you put a television set in the kid's bedroom. And pretty soon the kid is watching hours and hours a day of advertising. And then you reach a point in our time now, I mean, that's gradual over 30, 40 years, a half century. But now we've got to a point where, every kid is walking around with his own screen or her own screen 24 hours a day, every waking hour anyhow, either watching it on an iPad, a computer, or a phone, and being constantly bombarded by advertisements for one thing or the other, but in order to basically turn the kid into a consumer. And so this is we've got to think about what's the implications of that process. It isn't simple and it isn't obvious, but the implications are huge, I think. And the main one, so almost metaphysical, is that you've objectified the child, and you therefore feel free to manipulate the child. The same way we've objectified the people that we colonized, or the people that we've used for economic purposes in any way, slaves, for instance. We objectify them once we do it, so that we don't feel bad about it, basically, so we don't feel guilty. And you objectify the workers, if you're abusing and using and turning them into utilities. And you objectify children when you turn them into consumers. And once you objectify a child, objectify anybody, any human being, you're free to use them as a sexual object too. And there is a linkage between that, and it's to the degree that we in the process of objectifying sexualize the child, because we know sex sells. You can sell goods through sex faster than through any other means. You glamorize it with sex, and once we've sexualized the child, it's really easy then to cross lines over into abusing the person, the child in this case, sexually. We've done it in racial terms. Men do it to women. It's always the best way to abuse, the quickest way to end up abusing a woman is to objectify her to start with. There is a role there in the community, in the community of man, if you will. That the storyteller, the way I like to talk about it and think about it is this, what's the role of the storyteller in the community, in the tribe, the large human tribe? What's the role of the storyteller, since that's what I aspire to be? And you ask yourself that. And again, I'll go back to the fundamentals in a way, and the way I was speaking a minute ago about what is a story and what is art in that sense. There is a fundamental role that from the beginning of time, human time anyhow, that the storyteller has held. And that is really to tell his or her fellows simply what it is to be human. We don't know. We're the only species that doesn't know what it is to be itself. I mean, every other species doesn't worry about it. It doesn't have to worry about it. But human beings have to worry. What is it to be human? The best and the worst of it. The demon and the angel. We need to know in order to control our own fate, our own destiny. And we need to know it over and over and over again with each new generation. We have to retell what it is to be human. And we do it best through stories, I believe. That the stories that matter to us and continue to matter to us and that we tell again and again and again are in a sense at bottom the same stories, but we retell them and reclothe them in our own time, in our own context, with each generation. So this is, yes, a 21st century story. The internet is part of it. It may be Homeric on one level, but it's clothed in the 21st century. And Huckleberry Finn was clothed in the 19th century. And it has an ancient structure to it, and it has a direct vernacular spoken voice behind it that's easily accessible. and this tries to accomplish some of the same things in that regard. But its essential function is just simply telling, well, what it is to be human, it is to be the kid, or it is to be the professor. That's human. And we would rather not know that, perhaps, about ourselves as human beings. We'd rather not think of ourselves as addicted or as lost, perhaps, in some ways, as the kid is, at least at the beginning of the story. And as lost as the professor is in his own way. And both of them, in their own ways, having lost any memory of skin. The professor's case because of his gluttony, his obesity, his addiction to food, and then in the kid's case because of his addiction to the internet and to pornography and the loss of his body and the digitalized version of his body. So that's very 21st century, but it's also a very old story.
Mediapart.